We're started.
Alright, let's do it. Alright, so today, I know last time we kind of discussed the broad categories of beer, being ales and being lagers. There you go. So today I'd like to kind of just take a peek more at some popular basic styles that we get. I'm not going to hit all of them because obviously there's so many, but these are just kind of the basic ones that we come in contact with. And this other page here, before we get into it, is just kind of this page out of this book that I have. Kind of is like a flavor profile thing. Now it is very basic because, like I said, there's many different interpretations of each of these styles. But just roughly, that's what it is. You can see on the left side there, the vertical axis is the bitterness scale. So you get, your sizes, your pales, and your pilsners up there is the bitterness, and then as you see on the horizontal there.
We featured an Abbey Ale here on draft.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I know we've had the Scottish ales, we've had bottled wines.
All of those, actually.
Yeah, with the exception of Abbey ales. So that's kind of, just a nice reference. You can add, you can keep with it. So when I'm talking about beers and lineups and things like that, when I say what it is, you can kind of look at this and go, okay, I remember from that it's a little bit hoppier, it's going to be a little bit sweeter.
Yeah, close to this.
Yeah.
By the vacuum filters.
Yeah, perfect. So on and so forth. So I guess the first one we're going to start here with is the Pale Ale, which really is kind of just coming into its own thing as with IPAs and things, but it dates back, and you can read there, all the way back to the 1850s, which during that time was very popular, darker style of beers and things like that. But then when they figured out by switching to coal from these roasted, or from the kilns they use with fire, created a lighter malt, easy to drink for. But it was also very expensive. But as it got cheaper, of course, as things got more popular. So what we're going to do is kind of just break down the difference between American pales, European pales, and Belgian. Very vaguely. So roughly off the top of your head right now, can you name any pale ales that we have here?
Lager.
That's one. Any other ones, Susan? Do you have any?
Wouldn't Stella be considered a pale?
No, it's a lager.
It's a lager.
Well,
Are you lumping IPAs into that? Or
yeah,
just strictly-
any kind. I mean,
Okay.
just a pale, just
Because then you
from
could
nature.
do the Dark Horse Brewing Company.
Right. There's the
Crooked
Crooked
Tree.
Tree IPA. The Hanging Frank would be considered a version of a pale ale because the term pale ale is kind of like, the broad category of ale.
Yeah.
Well, pale ale is like a subcategory in IPAs and things like that. Another subcategory. It's just like a different variation of what pale ale is. Because they take all of these that you see here are your basic, like pale ale, brown ale, porter, stout. All those are the very basic kind of subcategories of it. And under those you have imperial, the double IPAs, things like that. So the American pale ale, well, I guess we'll start with the European because that's kind of where beer really kind of originates from. The difference between the European and the American is that European pale ales, when they first started brewing them, the water in Europe was much harder compared to our soft water here. What that does is really brought out the hoppiness of it and really kind of restrain more of the fruit that you get. Now that's what the typical thing you get with American pale ale is that it really allows those fruity esters. Remember we were talking about the esters last time from the top fermenting yeasts. It really allows those flavors to come through, which is why in a lot of pale ales and things like that you get a lot of fruity notes, a little bit of spice, all those things that people kind of look for when you get a pale ale. Also, too, you get the bitterness from the hops, the cold water, or the hard water, you get in the European.
It's more bitter.
Right, it's got to be more bitter. Now, you can taste the hoppiness in European pale ales, but it's not the bitterness that you get, like from an IPA. You're going to have more of the earthy chemical. Very nice. Now, the Belgian pale ale, that's a whole different kind of beast, just because Belgian ales tended to be sweeter. Originally, the Belgian pale ales were created in World War II to compete against the Pilsners as the primary drink for all the soldiers and things like that. Typically, they're going to be less bitter than both the European and the American pales. Yeah, well, exactly. There's this Belgian cane sugar that they use that is just unbelievably sweet, and I'd say there's a good portion of Belgian beers you're going to drink that use that sugar, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's just it contains a lot more fructose or something, and that makes it just sweeter. And that's also the malts that they use are going to be sweeter. So that's the flavor you get from a lot of those. They're more sweet rather than hoppy. And also too, there's a typical flavor that you get with a lot of Belgian pale ales, like a spicy kind of thing. We'll talk about Belgians here a little bit more and get into the wheat beers because that's like the claim.
Like aluminum and
That's a style, absolutely. Now, do you have any other questions about pale ales or anything
No.
like that? I mean, this is going to be very kind of just broad flavor profile.
So you're saying the IPAs are pale ales?
It's
They're
a version.
Indian pale ales,
Yeah,
right? That's what it
yeah.
stands for,
Because
right?
there's that. It's like, look at pale ale as just like a category for that style of beer. And then there's different variations of each style. IPA is one of them. Indian pale ale is a double pale ale. Double IPA, Imperial.
So what makes an IPA different from a pale ale?
When they invented IPAs, or when they came up with them, they used to transport these pale ales and things like that back and forth from India, and they found that the beer would go bad because of how long the voyage would take. And they found that by adding more hops to it, that
It's
would,
more hoppy.
right,
Yes.
the hops actually preserve the beer for longer, so it was able to sustain that long journey, but in turn, changed the flavor profile, so that's why IPAs, rather than pale ales, means they are just going to have a little bit more hop bitterness. Now that can do anything from, obviously it affects the flavor of it, but it can also change the aroma of it. It won't really do much to the color, it may or may not change the alcohol percentage, depending on how long you boil the hops. Have you ever heard of a brewery called Dogfish Head?
Yes.
Well, they make 3 different variations of one of their IPAs. There's a 60-minute, a 90-minute, and a 120-minute. And what that really means, 60-minute, they boil those hops for 60 minutes, the 90 minutes, they boil for 90 minutes, 120, so on and so forth. And with different styles of hops, the longer you boil them, in each hop flower there's different chemicals in it that the longer you boil, the longer they get released, and that adds more bitterness to it. It restrains some of the oils. Like when you get a beer that has a very hoppy aroma, they boil it for less because the oils that are released, that releases the aroma. The longer you boil it, the oils reduce and allows the bitterness to come out, which also changes the flavor. So obviously a 90-minute, they boil that one for 90, it's going to be more bitter than 60. So on and so forth. So that is kind of what, you know, I kind of got on top of what your question was, but that's like the difference between IPAs compared to pale ale.
Then why are double IPAs and triple IPAs typically a higher percentage of alcohol than IPAs or pale ales?
Also in terms of that is, you know, like I said, with the boiling, releases that, and then also with the IPAs, when you're going into the Imperial style, you can do different things to them as far as aging them. Sometimes they'll sit a little bit longer, and that will help the alcohol percentage. Think of it like when you're getting into your stouts and porters and things like that, they could have their own fair amount of hoppiness, but they could also age that in like a bourbon barrel or something like that, and turn it to the alcohol percentage. Also, you have something?
No.
If you remember what we were talking about last time, with, you know, when we were talking about yeast as, you know, the main kind of topic of the last meeting, the yeast's main job is to take all the starch and things like that you get from the malts. They turn the sugars you get from that into alcohol. So when you're getting these beers that are going to be a little bit sweeter from the malts and things like that, they're allowed more time to generate, I guess you want to say it like that. The yeast has more time to eat the sugars, therefore making more alcohol. So a lot of times these Imperials and things like that, they sit for a little bit longer than your typical just pale ale, if you will. So the longer it sits, the more time these yeast and things like that have to eat the sugars.
So the longer time that they boil the beers with the more hops, are they getting a higher alcohol content because of the time that they're actually?
Yes, in combination with the malting and things like that. It's not just more hops means more alcohol.
So do you think they add more malt to balance out the hop flavor, and that would increase the alcohol content?
Some yes. That's a lot of brewers do that, especially in the American styles that try to get the bitterness. Unless, you know, they make beers like, think Hop Slam from Bell. That is strictly a hop person kind of beer, a hop head beer, where they're going for hop intensity, bitterness, and that is what you get. Now I'm trying to think of an IPA we may have had here before. But when it's flavor, we'll just take, we'll just say Hagen Frank. That's a nice hoppy beer. But at the same time, they balance it with malts. So you get the bitterness in there. So you also get kind of the malty sweetness finishing it off.
What makes Hagen Frank have that citrusy taste that other IPAs don't?
Hops and then fermented with grapefruit. But hops, especially the form of hops they use, if you get a lot of hops that are from, the Northwest, things like that. A lot of those hops just have like a grapefruit citrus kind of flavor that you just get just from being them.
It's strange that I haven't tasted another IPA that has that
Well,
citrus kind of aftertaste.
It's literally injected into the beer.
Yeah.
It's an added flavor. It's not just an IPA.
mm-hmm.
It's like a flavored IPA is a way to describe it.
Yeah, but next time when I come, I'll bring an actual, I've got like a chart kind of similar to this one, which I haven't seen. But this chart kind of just has a layout of hops, yeah. That's kind of the same thing like that. They have hops just from like where they're growing and what different flavors. There's so many different kind of hops. European hops, Belgian hops, American hops. But, yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
Yes.
That's pretty.
So I'm in the understanding that they add more malt to balance out the hops, and that's what increases the alcohol content of the IPAs.
Because the yeasts are allowed to eat the sugar.
Right.
The more sugar that's eaten, the more alcoholic the beer becomes.
Right, I mean,
Okay.
look at it like wine.
See, I thought it was...
13%. Is that kind of similar to something like that?
It's actually absolutely the same thing. The longer the wine has to ferment, the more alcohol is introduced into the wine because it starts sweeter. That's why Grenache is always higher in alcohol, because it's a sweeter grape. It's the same holds true with what he's saying. The more sugar the beer is to start, the more starch that's in it, the more alcohol is going to be produced from the process. And the more alcohol goes in the wine. And the longer you do it, there's a lot of sugars again. That's exactly what he said.
I was under the faulty impression it was because of the hops, and it isn't. It's because it's purely the malt.
Hops are
Okay.
strictly flavor. I mean, they're one of the key ingredients of the beer, but for the most part, they're flavor additive, an aromatic additive. And then you can do different variations all over. It's fantastic. But
Just one quick question, because I've had this posed a lot in the past. When we get people from Europe over here, they often will describe IPAs or pale ales as floral or fruity, and they say they have a lot of K. Am I under the impression that European hops don't have quite as much floral element to it, or is it more of a brewing process?
it's, I'm not really familiar with many European hops as far as what their profiles would be like. But yes, I can say it has probably to do with how they brew their beer. When I kind of reference their water that they have over there. They're the first start, because beer is mostly water. I mean, you're using harder water. Kind of when we were talking about lagers, how they're fermented, using that cooler kind of fermentation process restricts those esters from fully producing, which the esters are responsible for coming up with that fruity kind of floral bouquet that you were talking about that these Europeans come from. So their pale ales, just in their style and how they're brewed, are not going to be as floral. That's kind of the American way of the IPAs. It's just a kind of a brand new thing. Like the Belgians have their kind of not as hoppy, spicy. The Europeans kind of have their more earthy, where you can taste the actual flavor of the hops rather than the bitterness, and the Americans have the bitterness. So that would explain why they're like, ooh, it tastes like flowers. Anyways, let's move on to brown ales.
Have we ever had any type of European
Pale ale?
ales? Yeah.
Hard to come by, honestly.
I could look for some.
They're not a thing that a distributor likes to sell around here. Americans like American beer.
Yeah. So moving on to the brown ale. This beer was the first beer that was commercially produced in England.
So that would be gas then?
So
that's supposed to be, it's not born with a W at the end, it's supposed to be brown.
yeah, that's not supposed to be born W. Obviously, what makes a brown ale, the key component there is brown malt, and they get that kind of brown malt from slowly roasting it over a wood fire. All malts, as we get darker down the list here, what makes a beer darker is how long you roast it. So brown, they just do it a little bit, which kind of gives it that little slight nuttiness and a little bit of caramelized flavor that you'll find it to be.
The longer they roast what?
The malt.
longer the roast, the
The
malt,
malt.
the darker the beer will look, and also the flavor profile will change. Now the European browns, again, it's going to be your basic, kind of compared to the pale, it's going to be very basic and simple for what the flavors are. The maltiness, a little bit of sweetness that you get, that caramely kind of flavor that we just talked about. And really, that's it. I mean, when you get into the northern England, like if you remember Newcastle, that's a brown ale, that's a very typical northern England style. It's going to be a little bit lighter, as opposed to South England, is going to be a little bit heavier. And when you compare those to American browns, it's going to be the same kind of flavors, the nuttiness, a little bit of sweetness, caramely, but the difference between the browns in America and Europe is we're going to add a little more hops to it.
What's just an example of an American brown?
Yeah, Bel Air brown for sure.
Spelled Best Brown?
Yeah, short.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fireside nut brown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've had many brown ales here before, and I'm trying to think of like
Balanced
Midland-
brown is
Midland's brown,
amazing.
yeah. I wish we had a like a Newcastle here and one of the brown ales just so you can taste the difference because the flavors.
Why don't we have Newcastle? Is that pretty
Because we had it for a while, from what I'm told, and it just didn't sell well. So I think, I mean, it's something I could feature.
It sold well when it was on draft, but it didn't really sell very well.
I've never had a single person ask to do it.
We used to a lot. And again, when it was on draft. it
Well,
sold
people
well.
who like browns, if they see it on a list, or like I put
Yeah.
a lot of it inside of it.
I had one last night. It's delicious.
Yeah, well, we had Bell's Best Brown.
Yeah.
Draft, that's sold out.
So, just because this just kind of came to mind, does that mean that Newcastle, which is just for example, its flavor is affected by the color of its box?
That's a good question because I know the flavor, or like that's affected by the glass, really kind of has to do with the hoppiness.
Right.
I would say that it does, just because, just with how the light refracts into it is what
Well,
it
is
does
it
to it.
green? I forget. Is it green?
Clear.
Clear.
One of the only flavors
Oh,
out
yeah.
period.
That's something I have to look at. I didn't think about that one. No.
I know it affects Corona. I know that's
Yeah.
why Corona has its flavors specifically bottle. But I don't know about Newcastle. I never thought about it.
No. The only thing I drink is when I'm having a
How would it be
Newcastle.
affected by the, sorry, how would it be affected by the color?
Well, it's because you're allowing the light to get in. Think about, how your dad brews beer. You have to brew that in darkness. No light gets into it because it affects the brewing process, which results in different flavors than you're looking for. Think about Heineken's or Stella's. Kind of get that skunky flavor. That's from the direct green bottle lighting.
So would you say the more light it gets, how would it affect?
Skunkier flavor.
Oh.
With Pilsners.
Pilsners at least.
Yeah, with Pilsners like your Heinekens and things like that, your lagers. As far as a brown, I can't really say because I haven't
Corona, I
tried
would
it.
say it's skunkier though too.
Yeah, well, skunkier than compared to
Yeah.
something else. That
Well, what is that? What does that classify as?
I just think it's Coronas,
Cerveza.
which I mean, I think that's
Just
more of a-
Cerveza just means Mexican lager.
It's a lager. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what Landshark lager is now. Literally. It's Corona.
Yeah.
Better, Jimmy Johnson.
But same thing, straight out.
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean, it's the basic distinction you're going to get between a European and American. I mean, like I said, Americans like to add the hops to it. It might be a little bit fruitier than your basic European one. Also, something else if you look for a European brown ale, it's going to have a little bit fuller of a bottle.
I've always noticed that it seems that American brown teaches a little bit more residual sugar lactose. It's always a little bit more like a nuttier, sweet flavor. Where when I get a European brown, it's always a little bit more smooth.
Right. And I think that could have a direct correlation with that, with the water.
Water again.
When you say more fuller of a body, I know I should probably know what that means, but does that mean just a stronger taste?
Think about, like, we're going to call it mouthfeel is what they refer to when you're tasting beer and things like that. Think about how the beer feels in your mouth while you're drinking. Is it? Think about like chugging Coors Light. Just how the beer barely feels like you're drinking it all, just going down. And then think of like a Guinness.
Like, could you chug a Guinness?
Right.
Right.
Right. I mean, you can do
Right, I
it,
mean-
but think about the flavor, not the
Yeah.
flavor. Think about how
Could
it
be
feels in your
harder.
mouth.
It'd be like chugging a
sometimes-
milkshake versus chugging water.
Right. Sometimes I describe a beer as like a bready kind of mouthfeel. Think about, when you're having like a piece of white bread and how it kind of just sits in your mouth. And it gets kind of just really small and shrinks and with that peanut butter. how it kind of coats it. You know, so when you say something has a little bit heavier of a mouthfeel, that's kind of what we're going for. It kind of has a residing feeling. Okay, like you're able to chew it. Let's move on to the porters and the stouts here. So the porter is really kind of the very first thing over in Europe where industrialized brewing came from. Usually it was a lot before that, there was a lot of smaller pubs and things like that, made their own beer. Boom. But then, right in the 1700s, they figured out how to make these porters on a large scale. Now, what the porters started out as was these old brewers and things like that used to make these beers, but they would tend to go sour, and they found they would take a fresh batch of beer, mix it with the old batch, mix it up, you got porters.
Is that now?
Yeah, so another typo. And then now, or back then, they used to refer to these beers as half-needs. You had a half old sour one and a half new.
So they would take two totally different style of beers, or the same kind of beer? And make
Well, before it was just two different batches, old batch and a new batch.
Okay.
They would mix it. Then, as it started to progress and the timeline moved on, if I wrote it down in my notes here. But as it progressed, then they started doing different variations where they would take pale malts rather than, because before they just used brown malts. And they just, so they did pale malts and then maybe put a little bit more sugar in it, or they did this or that, just different things to change it. But essentially it started with mixing same style of beer but two different batches.
So now in modern time, porter would be still half and half?
Well, it could be. Now, a lot of times they'll mix three different variations of it. Now, like the American ones, I mean, you could do anything from aging it in bourbon barrels, like I've had beers before, or wine barrels, which gives it a different flavor profile. Really, like porters and stouts are my personal favorite style of beer, just because there's so many different variations of things you can do, that you can add so many different things to it to change the flavor profile. But still have that basic kind of porter swagger, if you will. I mean, when you're looking for flavors, I mean, can you name any flavors that we've had from porters here in the past?
That sounds just nice, actually.
Yeah, we had the Snifter one just not too long ago. Hold on. It wasn't the sparkling, it was,
A lot of porters.
yeah,
Like that.
but I can't think of
That
what
could
it
be my
was.
selfishness and my favorite, being my favorite
Yeah.
styles of beer.
So one example.
But it was bourbon barrels. They
Vanilla
were
Java Porter would be one
bourbon
example.
barrels. What was it?
Shorts
What am I
Black
thinking
Cherry
of?
Porter.
I remember these ones
You
I've
could
named.
do
What?
Shorts, half of their menus porters.
Yeah, vanilla Java Porter from Atwater we had on our menu.
Oh, yeah.
I used to have the Black Cherry Porter last year.
The vanilla Java porter is better.
That's
Atwater.
Atwater, it's out of Detroit.
Let's see, Woodsman was a porter.
What am I thinking of that was
Oh, you're probably
in the
thinking-
bourbon cask barrels? We could only serve 2 snifters. It
There's
was
a
dark
lot
as
of-
shit.
There's been a
We
lot of
just
those
had it.
Wasn't it the-
There was a
We just
Woodmaster
had it
from,
recently.
there was Woodmaster from Founders, but I think that was
No,
stout.
you know what
That
I'm
was
talking.
stout.
It was a
Yeah.
breakfast. Was it breakfast?
That was stout.
Yeah.
That was Founders.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that I've had many
But it was
porters on
aged in
these, right?
bourbon
Now that I think
cask
about it.
Backward bastard?
barrel.
Bastard Bastard? Might have been a porter.
Yeah.
You have,
I
but
hate
it's
to
been
say
a while.
that.
You haven't
Yeah, no, gosh.
Well, I got another one coming here. Actually, the next beer I have coming is going to be a Dock Block.
It doesn't have the name bastard in there.
Yeah. But anyways, we're getting kind of off it. So let's.
Or what the European porter is.
That's what we're into. So.
Just reminding you where we were at.
So like I said, the Europeans, like they started the porter thing, we started this whole topic of porters, and they were the first ones that after, first they used the brown malt and things like that, but then they found by switching to a paler malt, and then to adjust to make sure the color was still there, that's when they used like a caramelized sugar. So
Is that where the sweetness peanut porters?
Yes, that's absolutely.
And this is speaking.
These are European.
European.
Right.
So European, you can classify as being more sweet.
Well, this is back, I'm talking when they first started making the porters.
Back in
Now,
the 1700s.
And now, compared to the Americans, the same kind of thing, like I said, with the browns and the American pale ales. They took that basic kind of European recipe that what they had, and let's put a little hops in it. Let's maybe do a smoky malt, or maybe a little bit of fruitiness in there. Because I mean, we've had porters and stouts and things like that that really can kind of taste a little bit of fruit, a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of sweetness. Coffee, chocolate are going to always be present just because of how it works.
You keep saying porter and stout. Would you say that porter and stout are similar or the same?
They're so close, sometimes it's almost unrecognizable. We're going to talk about stouts now, and the key difference between what a stout and a porter is, which I feel it happens a lot. So
They're so closely linked,
Right.
even in the history. They
a
kind of
great way to kind of classify a porter is it's stronger than your brown ales, but it's not going to have quite as much of a bite as you get from stout.
So you're saying basically that traditionally there's usually more hops or more bitter in a stout than
Traditional. And there's also one key component that you're going to get in a stout that you don't get in porters.
Well, with porters though, how would you? Is there an average alcohol content being more or less than any other
Nope,
beer?
because that's one of the beautiful things about these kind of beers is you can do so many different things to it and change it in so many ways to still have the basic style of the beer. It's fantastic. So the alcohol could range from a 6 or a 5 to that Yeti stout that we had. I mean that was what 10.5%. So I mean you can range it all depending on how you age it. You age something in oak, it's going to get a little bit more, a little bit of vanilla flavor in there. It's going to change the alcohol. So if you age it in a wine barrel or a bourbon barrel, it's going to affect it. So moving on from that in the stout, does anyone have a guess on what it might be the difference between stout and a porter? Because like I said, they're very, very closely linked. In fact, before you answer that question, when stouts first came about, they were actually just an adjective that referred to a strong porter. It wasn't actually a beer when the term stout first came about.
What had more
Or malt.
sugar?
So in
Yeah.
other words, the term like stout porter.
Right. First, the stout was a strong porter, then turned to stout porter, and eventually just became its own class of beer called stout.
More malt and sugar? Is that the answer? Yes, that's the
No.
question.
Well,
The difference
if it's on your notes, it'd say it'd be black patent malt and roasted barley, but I don't.
That's the one. So the key components that differentiate stout from a porter is the roasted barley and black patent malt.
Well, I didn't know the answer would be right in front of me.
Right there.
Patent malt.
There you go. So yeah, so in 1817 what they did was British maltsters, they took their kilns and things like that, they roasted their malts and they just cranked them up as high as they could go and came out with black patent malt. Black, dark.
So it's just basically malt that's roasted to shit.
So black.
Burnt malt.
Black malt
So
is what it's classified as.
it's
So,
cooked till it's done.
right, and what that flavor you're going to get, remember we had that Kentucky breakfast style, what did you taste? Do you remember?
The Kentucky breakfast
Yeah, the
stuff?
one that we
Last
sampled
week.
last time.
Oh,
Do
it
you remember
was
the predominant
really
flavor?
caramel, nutty.
Coffee.
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 Coffee, dark chocolate, burnt, caramel, all
So
those
you're
kind
saying
of...
coffee's pretty traditional tasting characteristic of
Right.
But I thought
Which
it was
is-
because it was breakfast, so it put
Well,
coffee in.
They did have coffee, I think. we checked
Right.
that one, but
A lot of them do.
But a
but
lot of
most-
them just
most
naturally have
stouts,
coffee
Yeah,
to
it
them.
might not be what is pronounced.
Right.
But it's still there.
Probably makes the
Strange,
flavor better.
and I was just reading, I got to show you this article, this other book I was reading, it was just about how you taste beer and the different things that happen. There was something about coffee. The coffee, it's like, what did it say? It was not actually just like a flavor of it, like the actual flavor of coffee is not released, but I don't remember.
Now would stouts be strictly limited to tasting like coffee, or is that just a...
Well, it's kind of, I mean, the flavor profile is going to come through. It's kind of similar to a porter. There's going to be some kind of coffee hint there. It's maybe an espresso. Or some dark, roasty kind of flavor, however you want to classify it, will always be present there. So, the difference, like Robin said, with the roasted barley, what that is, because it's roasted and it's not malted barley, it's sugar-free.
It
So
doesn't
the stouts
break
are
down.
going to be very dry. Think about, the Irish stouts and things like that, they're going to be very dry. There's not going to be any kind of
What is
sweetness.
sugar-free? The actual beer itself will be sugar-free, or
Well,
the
just
malt?
Barley doesn't have any starch in it, and
Okay.
starch is basically transferred into a sugar, which turns into alcohol.
Right.
So because it's drier, there's going to be less residual
Yeah.
sugar.
So using barley instead makes it so that there's no sugar.
Yeah, well, less.
Because I mean, at some stouts, they'll put some sugars in it just to do it. Like that Kentucky breakfast stout, there's some sort of residual sugar in it. That's how you get this kind of
So
sweetness.
they're basically using roasted barley instead of the malt.
Well,
In addition.
Right.
In addition.
Right. Precisely. Because if you had like a roasted barley compared to a malted barley, the malted barley would have sugar. The starches would be subjected to yeast and things like that, again, which turn it.
Okay.
So, the flavor profiles that we're going to get to are just going to be, again, spicy, fruity. That's
Is
stouts.
this American?
Well, it's typical with European and American stouts are very similar to the fact that flavor. I mean, Americans are just kind of, because they're crazy, they're going to do the same thing kind of with porters. You know, you can add sweetness to it, you can add hops to it to make it a little more floral, a little bit bitter, age it in, the bourbon, oak barrels to get different flavors. That's why it's so fun to try different porters, because the flavor profiles are insanely different. And again, the alcohol percentage can range from, you know, normal 5 to 6, 7, or it can be upwards of 10 or 11.
Americans typically have a desire for a sweeter, sweeter beverage anyway.
You can say that typically have a desire.
I would say, I mean, if you look at American beers, I'd say that the better thing would say that they have a bigger desire for flavor. You look at a lot of European beers, any porters or stouts, they're smooth, they're dry, they're rich, they're full-bodied. But Americans seem to like to put some sort of intense flavor profile, whether it's coffee in one, or caramel in another, or sweet, or super dry, or super hoppy. I mean, they like to focus on one flavor in beer.
Exactly. I think that's just the American way. I mean, they took the pale ale, let's inject it with a crap ton of hops and see what happens. People love it. Like Robert said earlier with the pale ales, Europeans come over and they're like, why does this beer taste like flowers? Because they probably say the same thing with the stouts and the porters.
I think this is an American thing, and we want to do that.
Alright, it is 3 o'clock, so we'll just finish off here real quick. So we'll get on to the wheats. So traditionally there are 3 different varieties, as you can see there. There's the Belgian wit beer, the Bavarian Weizen, and the do you think it's pronounced Berliner or Berliner?
I'd say Berliner.
Berliner Weiss.
That's an American thing to say, yeah.
Right. So, typically we're just gonna kind of just go down these 3 traditional styles. First, we'll talk about the Bavarian Weizen. That's was first came up with in Munich, Germany.
Right,
the Bavarian Weizen, the middle one on there.
Oh, yeah, right, from the face.
Yeah. A very popular style of this beer. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but the Schneiderweiss.
Schneiderweiss?
Schneiderweiss?
It's actually a pretty good beer.
That's
It is
the
a
name
good
of
beer.
the beer?
Yeah.
Night of face.
What happened was, whatever family back then I had it in my book, I didn't write it down, originated this beer in Belgium, or in Munich, excuse me. They, yeah. They made beer, but then they're just like, whatever. And then this guy, Schneider, reinvented it, came up with it, mass-produced it, and it's still popular to this day. The traits of this Weizen style, the Bavarian Weizens, are they're traditionally going to be unspiced. You know, like I said earlier, a lot of Belgian beers, you get kind of a spiciness that they add to it. This one's going to be unspiced. So the spicy flavors that you get from it are strictly going to come from the yeast that they use. So you get that
Any
kind
of
of
the spice in it is going to come from the yeast?
directly from the yeast, also with the flavor of like clove, bananas. Like when they make this beer, they make the beer itself. They don't put any additives to it. You know, compared to American beers, like if they're all this crap in there. This style of beer doesn't. All the flavors that you get, fruity, banana, clovey, spicy, that comes directly from Belgian yeast that they use. The next one, we'll talk about. Which one do you want to talk about?
Belgian beer?
The Belgian wit beer. A very popular style of that one. The Hoegaarden.
Hoegaarden, right?
I always like to say Hoegaarden.
What's the name of it?
Yeah. The same kind of thing. That beer, that style of beer. Yeah.
R-D-N. Hoegaarden.
Yep. For sure. That style of beer really, it was kind of going down, but then in the 1950s, kind of came back. Actually, the brewery of Hoegaarden over in Belgium, they reinvented this recipe, and their brewery strictly made this style of Belgian beer. That was it. and then eventually Anheuser-Busch bought it over. And now they're mass produced. This beer is going to be, you think, have you ever had a Hoegaarden before?
Yes.
It's good.
Mhm.
It's going to be nice and fruity, clovey, manny, just fantastic, easy drinking. The last one there,
What, real quick with wheat beers, what type of average alcohol content? Is it a wide range too? Because I
Pretty
always
big,
get
wide
a
range.
lot of people that ask me questions about alcohol content, like as far as like how strong of an alcohol content is.
really,
It'd be nice to have just an idea in my head if I know what kind of beer they're after and what kind of alcohol.
well, it's hard to really kind of pin the needle there on how strong the beer is going to be depending on what beer it is. I mean, you could say anything, like you said, like how we're talking about the 1040. Okay, yeah, that alcohol is going to be like 5 to 11 in certain situations.
Yeah.
It depends on whatever beer it is.
Because I think a lot of people, including myself, think to themselves, okay, an IPA traditionally has a higher alcohol content, so there must be, you know, so a different type of beer must have, you know, a higher or a lower
Sure.
alcohol content.
I mean, you could take like a Pilsners, they're going to be 5 to 6 for the most part, but then you can sit there, you can just jack one up if you want to, and let it sit for longer, you can jack it up. So I guess that's kind of a vague answer.
I agree.
I'd say a rough answer, it's not a good one either, but the more mass-produced beer is typically the lower the alcohol content potential. Not always.
Because it doesn't age as long.
Well, just because that kind of beer they're designed, because like you remember we were talking about the longer you boil the beer and things like that, the longer time it has to do all that stuff. When you're mass producing something, you're trying to do it quickly and get it out commercially as possible too. And I mean, think about it. If Bud Light was a 7% beer, there definitely wouldn't be as much Bud Light sold because people wouldn't be able to drink that.
People would be able to drink a case in
You know?
one night.
So kind of look at it in
the
those.
point of the
Well, you would. But
Yeah, right. So this last one here, this Berliner, how we say it? Berliner Weiss. Now this one, this style of beer, they do not boil the wort. Do
Okay.
you all
Wait,
remember
the
what?
wort?
You remember what the wort was from the last time?
Something to do with something.
Something to do with something.
Some cage or something, or,
Kind of close.
Susan.
yeah, like
Susan, tell me about wort. What's wort?
I don't remember.
something that they boil, or,
You're kinda
Is it a root?
Yeah.
You're pretty close.
A root?
Wort is the mash
yeah.
they're doing to boil, so it's where all the
Yeah,
spices
okay.
and sugars are.
Yeah,
They take a bag of grains and they put it in a little
There
mesh
you go.
bag.
That's it. I
And they
knew
boil
was
it.
something to
And
do
after
with
they boil it,
that.
the wort
Okay.
is kind of like a very sugary tea,
Tea.
if you will.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And that's what they
I remember
add.
it had
That's
something
where
to do
the
with
whole
boiling
thing
a
goes.
bag.
So this one, this style beer, they don't boil the wort at all. So it's going to get, again, it's really kind of fruity because they're not allowing sugars, things like that's released.
But does that mean the Weiss are going to have a lot more cloud with that?
Yes. They don't filter it as well, is the next thing I was going to make. Belgian styles typically are all not filtered. Think about our winter white here, the Belgian style. Kind of looks very cloudy, you know?
It's like milk.
They don't filter it. With this style beer too, because of all this that they do, it spoils very quickly. And in turn, it kind of gives it that flavor. Kind of gives it like a level of acidity. It's going to have more kind of acid. Kind of takes some kind of very pungent. And that's kind of where sour beer
You
is.
need water after kind of
Right,
beer.
yeah. I mean, have you ever tasted a sour beer? Kind of along those lines. Where sour beers I could talk about forever.
Oh,
Those
sour
beers are
beers.
so amazingly complex. And I
They're
love them.
awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think they
Yeah.
beer if you wanted to.
But I'll close it out here. You know, so those are the three traditional style of wheat beers. The American wheats are all derived from these three basic styles. Americans can take a little bit from that, a little bit from that, a little bit from there. And they can just kind of interpret it however they want that house to stick it in. Well, I guess it's not sticking in bourbon, but kind of lump all in one.
I have a question. I've always been kind of curious. When we take, I'm not quite sure what to classify them, but I figure it's probably really great. Beers like Plant Dew and Le Mans, and the other one. What style of wheat beer are they? Are they sour beer? I've always been kind of intrigued in what
Well, sour beers,
I know they're not a sour, but I'm just trying to figure out what type they are. They don't quite fit.
They're, Berliner Weiss.
she said it like
Excellent
with
answer.
an accent too.
Have you had them before?
I have not had.
So you haven't had them?
No. I'm just slowly starting to get sour beers. Drew that here, worked here, you exposed in the first one. And I really kind of got turned on. I'm just slowly
Go to
starting
the
to get into
Tennessee
it.
Sam and look for Dumont.
I saw them when I was there.
I want to know what it is.
That sounds French.
Well, it's a French word, but it's a Canadian beer. And so
Well,
it's from Quebec.
that
And
is
so it's a French Canadian. French Canadian. But it's a triple fermentation process. And the final fermentation is literally in the bottle. They put yeast at the bottom of the bottle and let that ferment sugar. So in theory, the longer the bottle sits,
that when
the
you
more
pop
alcoholic
it,
and the less sugar it becomes.
we had one of these. That the yeast sits in the bottom, and then when you pop it, it like does something with the beer. It has a card on the side.
Right. And so, as a
That's
result,
another
you
clear
know,
bottle
this
beer.
is probably one of my dad's favorite beer, sure, but maybe Chimay. And what he does with these is he'll buy a case, and he'll drink one or two, make sure the batch tastes good, and he'll just store the rest for a year, 2 years. And then he'll go and he'll start sampling them, and he'll do it in about 3-month increments per bottle.
Yeah, what
And
is that
every,
called?
I kid you
How
not,
is that?
every 3 months the bottle is changed dramatically because there's less sugar in it every single time. The other change goes up.
Yeah,
It's
it
quite
is.
an interesting little beer, but I don't know what
Side
style it is.
doors.
Did you say that all or at least most domestic, like the most popular domestic light beers or what have you, are those wheat beers, American wheat beers?
It'd be a lager style, like a light.
Bud
Bud Light would be
Light,
like
Miller Lite.
Bud Light would be a lager, like an adjunct lager, like Budweiser is an adjunct lager. That's because what makes it a lager is the fact that they use rice and corn in it rather than just malt.
So lager, you wouldn't put a lager as a basic style of beer?
Lager, when we talked
covered
about
lager
last
last
week,
Oh, okay.
there was lager and ales. Like those are two main classifications under which, I mean,
Did you have paperwork from that
can
last
get it.
week? Yeah, if you can,
Oh, sorry.
no, we're done.
Yeah, I think that was my only question. What time is it?
3.
17?
Great.
Ready?
I'm gonna-
Great.
No, wait.
Um,
I have to taste test this. You guys are all here, and we're already getting stuff sorted.
taste test it.
So we have any, appreciate everyone's input and insight. What should we talk about next week?
What should we talk about next week?
Let's talk about different regional American beers.
Regional American beers?
Uh-huh.
Like what? Like you think you're going to get...
Colorado, California, Michigan. We can sample different locations. They're all different, I've noticed. That would be
It's going to
fun.
be regional like that. It's not going to have as much of a differentiation such as wine. Because
It does, though.
it does, but not as much as not as dramatic.
Yeah, look at Boston style lager.
Yeah.
That is way different than Butter, Bud Light, or Red.
Right. Well, that's because Bud and Bud Light are it's an adjunct lager because like I said, they're not using the basic ingredients to put in rice in it. They're doing all that stuff.
I was gonna say,
Well, think-
it's like one of the only.
Well, think about too. Like when you're growing wine, when you're growing grapes, like you could have 2 grapes on 2 separate vines, like right next to each other. And this one could taste different from that, just from the exposure it might get to the light at different times. Hops grow similar to how grapes grow, but they're not going to have that differentiation between them. It's just that style of hop is going to have these flavor profiles. Now, granted, some might have a little bit more than another batch, just because of where it's growing at, but it's not going to have that much differentiation of flavor.
It does, though.
But not
Like a California hop versus a Michigan hop are really different.
right. Well, yes, because they're diverse. I mean, you have aromatic hops,
Right,
you have
the
strictly
soil.
hops.
Right?
So we can talk about that. Let's just talk about hops in general. We can go across the world with hops, because there's Asian hops, there's European hops, Belgian hops, American hops. There's hops out in Australia. I can't remember the name of them. And all of them have whatever you get spiciness, you get nuttiness.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
is sort of strictly aromatic, sweet and growth. So we'll do hops.
Hops. Hops.
We're doing hops next week.
No chance.
Ha ha!